instead of turning around and blaming my past or blaming my parents or blaming what they were born into, I look at this with utter reverence, which is why I do believe in astrology. And I look at the exact lineup of the stars of the people that I chose and who chose me. And I go, this was a buffet and a smorgasbord for me to learn who I am, why I came here, and that I already am that which I seek.
Welcome to the I Don't Believe in Astrology podcast. The podcast is dedicated to conscious souls looking to change the world. Astrologer by day, climate activist by night. Here is your host, Debra Silverman.
So welcome to part 2 of Debra Silverman. It's so exciting. And Mary Helen, who are doing the second part to this podcast, I Don't Believe in Astrology. It is because we had so much excitement and enthusiasm the first time that I didn't get to ask the questions that I really, usually what you guys are used to when you listen to my podcast. So I want to begin by saying, Mary Helen is a chiropractor. She lives in Ireland. And she has leprechauns in her office, not to mention a few dead people. Let's tell the truth. She has a gift of being able to see between the worlds. We have a Pisces here who is a professional Pisces, in that from a very young age, she had the skill of being able to see through the veil. And as she's matured and turned into a grown-up and become a doctor through a series of events, including a near-death experience that we're going to review slightly and then go into more conversation, I ended that podcast with like, wait, I had so many more questions and I felt like we only just surfacely scratched it. And I really would love to go back to where we left off. So let's start with your professional. How do you describe yourself to people when they say, tell us what you do?
There's not a business card yet big enough, so you just kind of put whatever in the moment. That's one of the things about being able to read your world and read your audience, is being able to go, I'd forgotten my proper documents coming back into Ireland once. And so when the immigration officer asked me, what's your profession? I went, I'm an author. I'm a lot of different things. But on that moment, I went, I'm an author. And I don't have my documents with me because they were in the post. And he said, all right, I'll stamp that passport if you publish my book. And I went, I will. And he's on his 5th book.
That is the story. This is exactly who you are. I'm going to share the screen just for a moment so I can pull up your chart for all of you that are astrologers. We're going to let this conversation be validated. I'm just going to try to pull this down. Where is the little down button so I can get this? Oh, here, I'll turn this thing off and I'll turn this thing on. There we go. So what you're describing is your Gemini rising, which is your soul. The rising sign is also called the ascendant in astrology, and it's based on the moment of birth. And yours is Gemini, which means you're very versatile. As a soul, you can be an author, you can be a mother, you can be a daughter, you can be a healer, you can be a teacher, you can be a speaker, it's a very versatile, but it also limits people because they get self-conscious, like, well, which one am I? I mean, it makes some people get a little confused because the versatility tends to leave them in slightly ambiguous ways. But because, here's the other part, this Mercury, this is the little guy with the hat, which is why I'm wearing a hat on his head. It was this. So this is where the mom was when you were giving birth, when she was giving birth to you. She was sitting here, and above her head, because it was almost noon, it was 11 o'clock in the morning, the sun, the circle and the dot, was right above the hospital bed. And Mercury was also right above the hospital bed. And so it makes it a very significant indicator. And it speaks to Mercury in Aquarius is the futurist who sees patterns and has the gift of articulation, of being able to describe things that we don't get, either from the future or they're from the past, but they're time travelers. And from the story that you told, and now I want to just back into the story, one of your gifts was, as a child, and I want you to speak to this, having the relationship with Judge, of this, grandfather who wasn't alive, but for the little girl. So can you just start with that just briefly, how that encounter shaped you?
Absolutely. And it's funny because I had a friend in the state message me yesterday. Her grandson had a little accident that had scared him so badly that all the death questions came up. And she sent me a message and she said, he got terrified about death. He's now asking about people in our lives, in our family who have passed on. And now he's all death, 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 death. How do I talk to this child about death? And I went, ooh, I have a good one. And so when smartphones came to pass, when we all started getting conditioned to using a smartphone, an iPad, a laptop where there were multiple apps open, it started to get really easy to talk to kids, because that's their language, about what death is like. And so for me, it was like I had my 3D world open on one app, and then I had my app that had Judge on it, and they're both real. They just come across differently. It's like now, when I'm talking to you, I know you're a 3D flesh person there, but I also know that I can't reach out and touch you in the 3D flesh, and that we're having a 2D experience on a 5D transmission. And so you've got to be able to connect and marry all of those different elements in order to be able to understand that we're not just the suit.
Exactly. So when you see, or when you saw, is this still true that you can see from the other side? People do communicate?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Do they come in physical form where you actually visually see them, or do you sense them?
Yes and yes. It depends on their ability. It's really interesting because transmutation, when you're talking about moving from, whether, we're used to hearing that as a flesh person turning into something else. Well, it also applies to the spirit world, where someone who's in spirit is trying to access the 3D world. Some of them do it via electricity. Some of them show up as an apparition. Some of them look like mist. Some of them fly. Yeah, exactly. So that is down to the ability of that individual spirit and where it is on its journey outside of this world, and also on our receptivity, so how we have conditioned ourselves to be able to hear. I practice this every day. So I just assume, I don't think I'm so gifted at it. I think that I've put a lot of hard work in to being able to see it every single day. So it comes a lot more naturally than if I only reached out for it, like in my time of need. Oh, somebody come and give me a message. That doesn't usually work well for people. It's a daily discipline.
The truth is, as a Pisces, one of the gifts of this particular sun sign is it's the very last sign of the zodiac. And it's a sign of evolution spiritually, that they are comfortable being able to manage different dimensions. It's really their reality. So being introduced to that as a child is part of your natural operating system. It doesn't surprise me that it's continued and you've practiced it and you've cultivated it, just like an artist, a Libra, might come in and be able to paint, or a Taurus could sing as a child, and then that skill becomes so comfortable, they cultivate it. What I wanted to ask you was about the evolution of these beings. Like certain beings I sense come down, obviously Judge was one of them, with a lot of information to translate. Others, to your point, are they doing in a different classroom, where they're learning different topics, or their skill set is different? Is that anything you're aware of why some beings have the gift of going through the veil, and beings like you, the gift of hearing them? Would you speak to evolution or anything you're aware of?
Yeah, well, it's the same thing as like when we come here, you might have somebody who grows up and becomes a college professor. And so their daily world, they show up, and on a daily basis they go in and they go and study. But think of like Indiana Jones. He's sitting in the classroom and the girls are fluttering their eyelids at him, and he's teaching history. But then where does he go? Where do we follow him? Out into the field. And so there are different souls, there are different human beings who have, a mainline profession or a mainstream income or whatever, but they've got all these other things going on the side. It works the very same way in the spirit world as well. So you would have people who are beings who might be assigned to this particular task, but that doesn't mean that they can't take a trip down south,
This is good for our audience. So any of you listening, everyone asks an astrologer all day, what am I here for? What's my gifts? I mean, we're looking at Mary Helen's chart, and clearly she's got the gift with Mercury on the top of the chart as the communicator of time travel. She's a Pisces. She can go interdimensional. She's Gemini rising. She can do versatility. You can look at your chart. I can look at your chart, I should say, and I can discern what your promise was. So that is the function of astrology, is saying the karmic agreement that someone comes down with is described right there on that page. And someone who's skilled to read hieroglyphics from Egypt can actually discern and be able to articulate, like, you are a communicator. So here's another one of my questions that I was left with. On the other side, what is the similarity to the spirit world and to the humans? Like, do they eat? Do they sleep? Do they make love? Do they have relationships? I'm wondering what exists, because they clearly show up with our relationship stories. What is their dynamic?
So it depends on where you land. So for me, because I was still in that experience, still earthbound, as in I was coming back
In
here.
between. Yes.
Right. So, my friend Jim Bruton, he'd be a great guy for you to interview. He died in a plane crash and came back. I know, so cool. And so his book is called The In Between. And so he describes this space, and his experience in between was really different than mine. And we love that. We love talking about my friend Peter Bedard, who wrote Convergence Healing and had a near-death experience. His was really similar to mine, except for he didn't want to come back. I did. And so a lot of us have these different experiences, but the one thing that we share in common is that we all came back here. So what people have to remember when they're listening to the stories of near-death experiencers, we have one perspective from a tunnel that we went through and got to outside of the earth plane, but came back. It was a return ticket, which is very different than a one-way ticket when you're out of here and you break that glass ceiling and now you're into an otherworldly experience. So any of us, and always do remember this, because there's a lot of people out there who say a lot of weird stuff, and I'm one of them, but what you have to the filter you need to run that through is, we all do have that same thing in common, is we came back here. So if someone is telling you, this is what is happening here, 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 and here, they can tell you if they learned that from someone in that space, but where they went, what they went to is that space between, where generally we're having experiences where we can, we're having that life review. We can see things from a different kind of time space continuum than you would on a 3D experience here on Earth. But are there other worlds? I absolutely know there are, because what I did get to see and work with as well was a council of beings where they were coming from different spaces. There were, in this particular space, there were several Arcturians there. And I'd never even heard of an Arcturian.
How did you know? Did they tell you that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And
you had an encounter, because I've had this too, which I hardly talk about. You've had an encounter with the council, and they identified where they came from. And did they look different as creatures?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so what was interesting is you can't help but, as the being who's not in the body in the room, the strange one, the odd one out in the room of strange beings, they were all physical in form, and they all looked completely different. There were 3 Arcturians out of that 12. And they all looked different. They communicated differently. Their facial features were different. The bodies looked different. Some of them were clothed, some of them weren't. So you can't look at that and go, they're all coming from somewhere. It would be like a European dress who was wearing all the skirts and the hair and the whole thing, arriving to Africa where somebody is wearing nothing more than a loincloth, and going, they're both real. They're both beings having 2 different experiences.
What was the message from the council that was handed to you? Why did they encounter you? Why did they find you?
I continue to work with that council to this day. So that project is ongoing and up and coming. It's a series of it's a series of books, but it's a series of information and presentation that I've had to wait very kind of impatiently.
Because you're not. And then tell me, what do you feel about the future, knowing that there is these projects that are preparing us or that are taking care of the next lineage? What is your instinctual? This is one of the questions I ask on my podcast. How do you feel about the future of planet Earth and the human dimension?
We don't have the power, the capacity, or the smarts to destroy this place. So just take it to the bank. So this place has been going on forever and a day. And what happens is, when we get to a place where we endanger ourselves, Mother Earth shakes us off like a dog shakes off fleas. That's what happens. And that's why we have footprints of so many different civilizations.
And were the dinosaurs an unevolved species, or was that, like, there's an encouraging thought that the humans are coming in, the dinosaurs came out? Like, Is this a species that just simply evolves and that's the nature of creation?
No, because timelines don't work like that, because that takes us in a kind of a
Linear.
marching through a linear timeline, when time, as I've discovered in that space, is concurrent. So it's not that one is more evolved than another, or that someone from 13,000 years ago wasn't as intellectually evolved as someone in 2024. So you have to remember that that's always happening concurrently. That's the infinity loop. That's that symbol. It's not a straight line up.
So Mercury and Aquarius. So my question is, I have some concerns about the human disrespecting the host, like we are abusing her. And part of this whole podcast has been an evolution about environment and what we're doing with the plastics and with the oil and with the loss of the coral and what's going on with the temperature. So when you hear that, knowing your access to the council and having the information, your chart is built as a channel, what is your feeling? Do you have an opinion about the influence of the human on her host that she seems to be?
Did you ever see Harry Potter, and when they're returning to their dorms and they're on those stairs that move?
I did not.
Okay, so any Harry Potter fan out there will know that when the kids are going back to their certain, you've got the Gryffindors and the Slytherins, and when they return to their dorm rooms, there are these stairs that move. And so it reminds me very much about what you're describing here. It's kind of like our tectonic plates remind me of the stairs. This place is a perfect design, that when we get to a point where we're getting too big for our britches, and we're getting close, what will happen is there's a shift. There are so many amazing things set up here on this planet physically, i.e. volcanoes, i.e. underground experiences that the average human being doesn't know anything about. It's self-cleaning. It's like a self-cleaning oven. And don't hesitate to believe for one moment that it won't clean itself when it's time, right? So if we start getting smarter and we slow down the way that we're dirtying our space, which is human beings are quite filthy when you think about it, because like my own dogs, they won't pee pee and poo poo in their room they sleep in, because they know better, because that's gross. Yet we as human beings will pee pee and poo poo all over the place and make this wonderful, beautiful planet of ours, trashy, and expect somebody else to clean it up.
So it's very clear that, to me, as an astrologer and as a psychotherapist who's worked for almost 50 years, the human psyche by nature has resistance, because I'm older than I look. The human nature has resistance to actually doing the right thing. Like there's a high road in every part of astrology and a low road. And depending on the evolution of this person who's done the work, as you described, you came in this life with the evolutionary inheritance of seeing other beings. I came in this life with the memory of astrology. It didn't take but 2 minutes for me to remember it. There are beings who practice, and that's the invitation of this podcast. You may not think it's worthy to just be a housewife or to just be a parent or to just be a teacher. It's not true. You're refining the skill set that was handed to you based on your chart. And the more that you do the next right thing and find the equanimity and the peace, we are cleaning up where we live. And this is our contribution. But the challenge I see as a therapist is the human dimension has a resistance to taking the high road without role models. Like if we're left to a group, we'll all go to the lowest common denominator and we find ourselves slightly lazy. This is my new book.
It's that herd mentality. Absolutely. Exactly. Which is by the nature of every system and power on this planet is absolutely encouraged. Don't be different than the crowd. Don't be different. That herd mentality.
In your chart, I know your mom's in the room. You cannot follow. You think you're totally independent. You got a little rebel. You keep doing things independently. That's the evolution. And there's people watching this who are fascinated by astrology. Why? Because you want to be you and you want to be chunky and not homogenized. And you want to make sure your individuality is showing up. And does it have a cost? Yeah, because you're separate. Sure. But in the name of evolution, be separate. Keep
absolutely. And when people go, well, what's it all for? What's the point? You have to remember you are leaving not just a physical footprint or a carbon footprint, but a vibrational footprint. So I remember when I was staying with a friend and she had this beautiful mobile home that looked over these fields that rolled into these mountains in Ireland. It was just fabulous. It was just like a little getaway. And she asked me one day if I would roll her rubbish in the bins up to the shed so that they could come by and collect. And I was pulling behind the everyday refuse and then the recyclables. And so I get up to the shed, and the truck happened to arrive right when I got there. And I was standing there, and one of her neighbors had pulled up as well. And the two of us stood there and watched the guy throw the same two bins into the same truck, which meant that all the everyday stuff and all the recycled stuff that had been washed and separated out just got chucked into the same truck. And I stood there, and he let out a string of words that I will not repeat here. And he said, "What's the point? What is the point?" And I said, "Oh, there's a point to it, because it's not about what they're doing. It's about what you're doing. It's your intention. It's your vibration. It's the frequency. It doesn't matter what the outcome is. Like, this is what we talk about and preach. This is what's important to us. It's not about that outcome. It's how you showed up. I washed out those jugs. I washed out those little bottles. I did that. That was my will, my intention, my love set into creating a better space. What someone else does with that information is none of my business."
This is so beautiful. You're describing the reason why, as individuals, we must do the next right thing. One, you're evolving your soul that's going to create your next life to be reflective of evolution. Two, our whole species is counting on each of us individually to have the integrity. So I want to ask this question. You said this earlier, when you were out of the body and you had this decision to come back in. And some people, I've read so much near death, and I want to say 90% of people are like, I don't want to go back. As soon as they hit that level where the energy shifts and there's so much love and the colors all get bright and they're in that dark space, and then in comes their guardian, and then in comes the counselor, like, whoa, this is amazing. And then they're said, "Excuse me, you have to go back." And they go, "I don't want to." And I understood you to say that you had this decision. And I'd love to hear.
I made that choice.
So I'd love to hear what motivated you, because for me, I have an ambivalent relationship with Earth, because it hurts me so much that people hurt each other. So I find this place, it can make me cry just thinking about it. On the other hand, I'm so in love with the Creator. How dare I not respect that which created me and the stars and fulfill my contract? Like, I'm not going to cut this thing in the middle and be disrespectful, but I'm caught as a Gemini between those two. And I can see that you had this decision. Can you speak to making that decision and what you know?
Absolutely, because it really wasn't a decision. I am just, you are what you come in as. I was programmed this way. I love being here. I love the experience here. I love all the wrong here. I love all the right here. I love the dirt here. I am fascinated by human nature. I'm blown away. I'm saddened. I'm delighted. I really love all of those experiences. Like, you know how there's people out there who pick Disney World over and over and over and over and over again. They never go anywhere else. They just like Disney. So, like, we all have destinations. Like, I'm like that with Scotland. There's a million places I go. I keep going to Scotland all the time because it just makes me feel good. And so it was very much that way about Earth. I like all that this has to offer, but I think having that deep, unwavering knowing of what else is out there and who we really are makes it a lot easier for me to let go of that and be here. I said to you before, if I spend too much time, I don't think I've ever spent longer than a physical minute thinking about it, it hurts too much to remember. So I don't think about it.
Stone sickness, right? So let's just speak to that in this audience. You have to ask yourself, what's your relationship with life? And are you committed to being here? And will you wash it out even if the recycling guy throws it away? Will you still stay true to what you know because you've made the decision to be the one to make the difference? And you really inspired me because I see that in you. I am not as strong as you. I think that if I had a near-death experience, I'd be like, uh-oh.
See you later, folks.
There goes Debra. She's leaving now. But I know that my devotion to that which created me is absolute. Like, the one thing I know about this life is that the astrology and God and spirit is 100,000,000% true. And my little mind, who doesn't like when people are sad, is cute. So I have to stay true to that devotion and not let my little mind take over. And I want to speak to all of you with depression or anxiety, or you feel like you're in the wrong place, or you don't have a relationship, or you're in the wrong relationship. All of that is just grist for the mill to see how much you can stay true to your own self.
And for people who doubt that they are, here's what's really interesting. There's not one person watching this right now. I don't care what their diagnosis is, what they've gone through, how deep, how dark it's ever been. They have no one to thank or credit but themselves. There could be other people who were great influences or who were there or very supportive. But at the end of the day, there's not a single soul walking this planet who cannot, within a split second, take themselves out. Not one. And even people who have felt so deeply dark and just hopeless, they still stayed. Because if they're watching this, they're still here. And no one else did that for them. Someone else might have made it possible for them to see the world a little bit differently. But ultimately, they didn't shoot themselves. They didn't hang themselves. They didn't take that pill. They didn't do whatever it was. They didn't, drown themselves, whatever. But that's available. That's an option as much as the breath we take. That is an option that is available to each and every one of us. And so for somebody to think that they're not strong, if they're here, if they are drawing breath, they are so strong, and they made the choice to be here.
I love what Dolores Canyon says about this is a volunteered position. And once you realize it's a volunteered position and that there's 8 million people standing in line trying to get here, there must be a reason that the evolution that occurs in the practice of being human and polishing up against all the hardship. When I realized it, I was like, oh, this is not a problem. The harder it is, the more I learn. The more I learn, the more I evolve. The more I evolve, the greater lessons I'm getting. The evolution of the species continues. So please know, if you're listening to this, near-death experiences. Someone asked me, I asked her questions when we finished, what would you like to hear? And she said, I love this question. She said, what if I never have a near-death experience? How can I get to where Mary Helen is? How do I get that level of consciousness without being taken out of the body, shocked into an awareness where you get to see the council and still come back here and carry that? Like, what would it take for people that don't have? Because I did have a near death and you did. And we both have so many examples through our practice of working with clients and patients, like miracle upon miracle. But what if you don't have that? How do you?
Well, that's kind of why that's why we're doing what we do. It's not because we are so incredibly intelligent and gifted. It's because we needed the knock on the head. To be quite honest, we weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing.
Wow.
And we had to, as my dad would say, you were a little bit stupid, and you needed a little knock on the head. And somebody had to tell you, hey, you're not using those gifts. You're not doing what you actually set out for yourself to come here and do. What are you going to do about that? So people tend to kind of look at a near-death experience or whatever, like, and they glorify it. And it's kind of like, it really happens to those of us who aren't doing what we were supposed to do. And I get a question often, why has every near-death person written a book? Oh, it's all about the money. Or I'm like, are you kidding? First of all, go write a book and see how much money you make. Second of all, it is not all about that. It's all about, we can't help but share the experience. It's just, you can't, I couldn't wait. You're talking about, making that choice to come back in. When my friend Peter tells me about, he was like dragged in kicking and screaming. And I was like, are you kidding me? I'm the personality type where I couldn't wait to come tell people.
And you also have a mom sitting next to you and a dad who is adoring you and a grandpa who showed up. And that's not true for the human nature general rule. So for those of you, this is important because I'm not in your camp. I did not get that wake up call because something was wrong. I was blessed at 15. I was at the dentist. I had nitrous oxide. I came out of my body. I saw my body below. And then it makes me want to cry. And then they showed me timelessness and they showed me, I couldn't remember my name. I was little. I was only 15. I couldn't remember my parents' name, but I felt the union I felt everything they say in the near death where you're like, and I was expansive and I was free and I was bonding with this incredible unbelief. And then all of a sudden the oxygen came back and I started coming back into my body and I started to have tears down my eyes. And the dentist said to me, are you okay? Why are you crying? And I was like, nothing here is what you think it is. This whole thing is just, I was 15. And he was like, wrote on a subscription on that little thing the doctor has, he wrote, go to the Michigan Metaphysical Bookstore. And I handed it to my mom, who had to be in the room because I was only 15. She was like, the Michigan what? So we didn't go because we didn't know what the metaphysical word meant. Fast forward, I had it again a year later and only a much more extended. And they directly said to me, one of my reasons for being here was to teach people how to listen. And so part of my practice, which I tattooed on my arm, the word listen and silent have the same letters. So in order to listen, you've got to stop talking and thinking and getting the mind. what is a near-death experience? But the end of the human dimension, so you can open up and listen and see and hear. So can you speak to that? Like, what happened to the thought process that allowed you to receive the impression and see the counsel? Can you feel the distinction in the name of your
Absolutely. And again, it's vibrational, it's frequency for me. It's you're changing tunes. I change my state so that I can open myself up to hear.
And that now you can change your state while you're in the human form?
Yes,
And how
yes,
do you do that?
absolutely. Well, what's interesting, I saw something the other day and it really made me start thinking. We talk about near death and we talk about these near death experiences, yet you and I both know death isn't real. You know that death is a doorway. So it's a name that's been given to something that has created this sense of finality for people. And then a religion has to come in to give us a way out of it because it's terrifying to think, and that's kind of how this world has evolved. When in actuality, each and every one of us who did have that experience simply had an out of body experience, and we got to see and feel the world from a different perspective. And so
delicious.
yeah. And it's just kind of because we can't say the near death almost makes it sound like, oh my gosh, we were nearly snuffed out. No, we just got so close that we got to peek out of the door and we came back in. And then we turned around and told everybody else what was out there. And some people are in a vibrational state to be able to accept that information, and other people aren't. It's like, I remember my daughter telling me she had a lot of struggles with some borderline personality issues. And I remember her teaching me how to talk to her when she was younger. Mom, if you see this happening, and no matter what you think you're saying that's so good, or it's going to be such a great teaching moment for me or whatever, if you see me like this, I can't hear you. And I went, oh. And she literally taught me how to speak to her and when to speak to her, when to listen and when to be silent and when to speak. And that's what it was all about, because me making what she was doing wrong certainly wasn't going to help the situation. Me making it about me and what her situation was doing certainly wasn't going to help anything. But me showing up and standing there and going, are you able to listen to me right now? And if she said no, then I didn't speak.
Thank you. This is my practice this life. This is why I have listened in silent. If you are watching this podcast, you know that my deepest love is listening and letting someone speak. And a really good podcast, which is why we had so much fun, is I am going into your head and I'm imagining that I saw that car coming. I felt my body. I went outside. I remember you telling the story so well. I had that decision. It was so familiar to you. It's like you'd done it before. You said, don't leave me in the body. Let me out. And out you went. And you had this, and this is, I watch near-death experiences as a practice because it's the deepest listening when the ego is put aside and your daughter said, please don't make it about you. Listen to me and pay attention to where I live. And this is union. And I think everyone in this world longs, all of us, for a partner, or for a best friend, or for the dog, to just look at you and listen and feel you where you live. And I think on the other side, this is my assumption, is the uniqueness. It's like they don't need charts because they're so uniquely themselves. There's such permission. Whereas on Earth, we're all trying to be normal, which is a setting on the dryer. It doesn't even exist. How do you act normal when you're such a combination of warring different sensibilities? And if not, listening to understand the ego must be put in its seat. Like, can you sit down? I'm listening right now. And if you could practice that, this is like my deepest calling for this planet. If we could listen to Mother Earth and we knew what she was needing, which we never listen to. When I pray over my food before I eat, when I slow down in the morning, when I wake up to collect my dreams, all of that is shh. I'm trying to put myself into harmony, and I'm inviting all of you to learn about your version, because everyone's is different. That's the curious part. You are built for words. I know you know this, and your mother, I bet you've been talking since you could talk, like you haven't stopped.
Mom?
Is it true, Mom?
She's like this.
Because you're Gemini soul and your Mercury's in air and you've got that gift. But some people that are watching this, you don't have the words that Mary and I have. You don't have the gift of the gab. That does not mean you can't listen with wisdom, because your receptor is greater than the talker, and it's not necessary that we have to all be the same. So that's my astrology shtick. The question I want to ask you is, here's some of my favorite questions for this podcast. When is the last time you cried? What makes you cry in this life? Where does your emotional body get touched, little Pisces?
I think the hardest challenge for me, and it's one that will never change, because remember, it isn't about, when I listen to you talking about Mother Earth and all of this, it's that recognition and knowing that you can't speed up nor slow down somebody's process of evolution or their reason for being here. And that Earth is so perfectly designed to handle that. And we forget sometimes our hearts bleed and ache for what people are doing. And yet, if you take that from the micro, the macro to the micro, and you realize they got it going on. They know what's going on here. They know what they're doing. And when I
really
see
helpful.
people doing things that are hurtful to themselves, and I wish so badly I could help them, but then I have to pull myself back going, that's not your story. Your challenge, your growth here is to zip it and not say anything. And the pandemic was huge for people like me, because I went through that initial phase. I was so freaking angry at the stupidity happening around me. That made me cry. And then I had to get to a space where I had to go, what are you doing? You know better than this. And then what was really irritating me then was when other people's choices were spilling or bleeding into my world. All of a sudden, I'm standing in a place where I'm having to defend what I do or the choice that I make every single day. And I was getting exhausted talking about, that same thing. Why are you not this? Why are you not this? Why are you not this? I'm like, oh my gosh, is the rest of my life going to be about talking about this subject? And that made me cry.
So would it be true to say that you have a deep, abiding trust, that during the pandemic or during life in general, you lean into trust? And that, can I ask this question? Does it come because you know the council or the others in the other dimension are watching?
Absolutely. And also because I don't fear death. And I think the people who struggled the most and still continue to struggle, and their skin prickles every time they hear the word virus or whatever, like they're ruined forever. Like they're just terrified. And it's because I don't fear the death end of it. I fear more, but it's not a fear, but I'm just like, ugh, the living with the consequences of those fears. It
Right.
really, talk about a buzzkill, like it's just.
So let me ask you, that's such a beautiful way to put it. When you say the earth obviously will survive no matter what happens, and that the human dimension is reaching a question whether we're going to destroy ourselves or not, what's the nature of our ability to stay awake while we get towards this critical moment? Do you feel, because I sense this, that there's a council or a higher intelligence brought to us by, clearly whoever designed astrology was a incredible team of
Of
high
course.
that could distill that your Gemini rising, you have the gift of talking, you're going to future pace, and your Pisces goes between worlds. Well, that was simple. That same team must be watching us now and aware that we are, as humans with free will, acting in a way that's not surprising as we watch the continuation of us. And I wonder if I have faith, and I want to see if you echo this, that it's being watched and orchestrated, or at least witnessed with
100%.
and that you and I were sent here because they knew they could count on us to facilitate the transition that we're in.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like, having one foot. We talked about this at the beginning of the last podcast, and it was like I was literally designed for this job, one foot in this world and one foot in the other. It feels like I'm stretching into the full splits sometimes. But, but I signed up for that, and I'm okay with that. And I don't do the terror of that. I get sad sometimes when I see how slow people are to come to this. But what's been really fun and where I'm truly blessed is you met Mom at the beginning of the podcast. Mom's 95, and we're having the best conversations now that we've ever had ever, and talking about some really cool stuff. And it was so interesting when you put my chart up there, and you were like, at 11 o'clock on February 23rd, 1969, this sun was over here. And you started talking about patterns. Well, my mom, before she walked into the room, was sitting in the back writing her second book, which is called But the Clouds Don't Move, which are snippets from her life as a child all the way through the last century to now. And one of our favorite things to do from the time, my earliest memory of my mother, is, what do you see in that cloud? What do you see in that cloud? she sees patterns. She trained my mind from a very early stage to see patterns in situations, to see patterns in animate and inanimate objects, not even realizing that's what she was doing. She was
That is
honing my
exactly
skills.
so funny, because that's exactly
Isn't
what.
that funny?
Yes, it doesn't surprise me. That is the nature of synchronicity and being able to be brought up by the mother and father that all of us had. You happen to be blessed clearly with your mother and your father. Some of us, it felt like a curse. And it was the learning ground for me. It was the teaching ground of how to get me independent, how to make me stand up for myself, how to not rely on others, and eventually soften my heart. And I did the healing. But here's the question I want to ask before, because I'm aware of time. This is what I wanted to ask you. If there was a person in the world who's alive or not alive that you could talk to, who would it be that you would love to have a conversation with?
I'm talking to her right now. Do you know, my mom is sitting here in the room. And when I say, because she carries my feminine line right now, she carries my history. We share a collective history. I might be the weirdo who's out there talking to dead people and doing all this, but she's the weirdo who got me here. So I still have the chance to ask questions. And imagine talking to your mom, who was a minister's wife and a mother, a housewife. She taught school. She did all sorts. Imagine at 95 being able to sit and say to her mom, do you know what? I've just come to the conclusion of how the religion that you and dad raised me in messed me up, and why at 55. And that's not a blame thing. It's about being able to have an open conversation. Think about the depths of Christianity as a child, and bless them, Father, they know not what they do. So they could be messing you up, and you just forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. So keep sacrificing yourself, because we love somebody who's hanging on a cross. We love to talk about sacrifice being the ultimate thing that a human being can do. And now you get to 55 and your entire life revolves around helping people all the time and sacrificing everything to the point of stupidity. And you step back and you get to have a conversation with the person where all of that began for you, and watch them go, gosh, you know what? I see. Because she in turn got to watch her father, my grandfather, judge my spirit guide who's always by my side. And she now, his little girl, is being able to see his life completely differently, because we glorified the fact that he died young and he gave everything and was exhausted because he was such a great doctor. And I'm going, can you see some of the stupidity in that, Mom? Can you see that he sacrificed time with his family in order to take care of people he didn't even know? And thank heavens I'm learning this earlier.
It's so
And
beautiful.
that might be why the dead guy hangs around me all the time. He's always giving me advice and guidance to do things a little differently.
This is so
He
Aquarius.
worked with Edgar Casey, and Edgar Casey was the same age as Judge when he died. They were both worn out at 66.
Okay, can we stop for a moment and just speak to this? Because as someone about to hit 70, I've learned to pace myself, which is why I'm not aging, because I questioned the assumption that I was supposed to be sacrificed. I questioned the overworking. I learned about walking slowly. I learned about going barefoot. I changed my whole program from my Jewish upbringing that sounded like this. Oi. I changed that whole conversation to, oh, I'm so excited. But that was to your point, it was a big decision because everyone in my family had that sound. It was
Sure.
chamber. So I'm inviting everyone listening to this. You must question the assumptions that were put into place in the name of our evolution as a species. That's why I think we may go extinct, because I think the assumptions of our society have put us into a conversation that doesn't have any room in our operating system to change it, except for you and I asking hard questions and you having your mom there. So I invite all of you. Go ahead.
Change this. Let me tell you how you change that, though.
Interested.
It starts at home, and it starts with, if I can look at my mom and have a conversation about something that is extraordinarily difficult that I'm realizing about myself, and it's something that's messed up about me, but I'm a grown up, guys. Instead of turning around and blaming my past or blaming my parents or blaming what they were born into, I look at this with utter reverence, which is why I do believe in astrology. And I look at the exact lineup of the stars of the people that I chose and who chose me. And I go, this was a buffet and a smorgasbord for me to learn who I am, why I came here, and that I already am that which I seek.
That's so beautiful.
That's how you change it.
That's so beautiful. There's something in astrology that I'm teaching this summer, and it has to do with your childhood wound actually feeding your fulfillment. And I'll just be specific. My childhood wound was Capricorn on the bottom of my chart was I had to be very old and very responsible as a child because I lived in an unsupervised area where nobody was taking care of me. So I became the goody goody and I was the girl that everyone wanted to drive home after the party and I never drank. And I was like, and then as an adult, I wanted to become my midheaven. This is what we're learning about is Cancer. The opposite of Capricorn is the compassionate, caring, gentle. So I became for the collective, for my audience, for the people that I teach to be the mom energy because I didn't have one. So the very wound that was put in place by my childhood became the leverage, the trampoline for me to jump into. I can become the very thing that I wasn't given. So like you were sacrificed or your father was or your grandfather was, you're saying, that will stop here. So this is where we have hope. I have hope that the future of the human condition will get adjusted and futurized and updated because I can identify, of course I had those parents. They weren't available. I had to learn self-sufficiency so that I could teach other people how to be gently received and cared for and mothered in a way that I didn't get. So point being, whatever your wound is, whatever that childhood story based on astrology and psychology, it was built to give you access to the healing so you could do it for all of us. And
I go through that list, I encourage people, make a little list. You might be shocked at how long it is of how many people you blame for things that are not good in your life, that don't feel good, that don't smell good, that don't look good, that aren't this. You don't have this story, you don't have this and this. And Mom and I were at lunch today and I walked past the dentist where I put braces for $5,000 a piece on both of my daughters as a single mother working, you know the story. And I sat down for a second. I went, didn't I do a good job? And it wasn't a blaming the fault. I had to do them by myself. I had to put it all. I went, man, I did a good job. And that was this wave that came over me when I walked past that dentist on the way in to meet my mother in the restaurant. And I just went, oh, that felt really good. And I'm going to take credit for that. Yes, that was awesome. I made that happen. Wow, that feels good. And I couldn't have done that if I was in any way, shape, or form in a space of blame.
Or victim.
Make the list. See how many people you blame.
I'm just going to tell you, Dr. Mary Helen, in your chart, in your childhood, the wound was that you were so special. That somehow at a very young age, you stood out, your parents adored you, and that in that responsibility of your childhood then turned into the opposite, but that was Leo. You were very special, unique, very seen. This lifetime, you were like, I don't want my ego leading. I'm going to let myself selflessly speak to truth without making it about Mary Helen. And so there's an example. It's so interesting how the wound of you being so, I call it special, being so special, always being identified as the one that saw dead people. And then your goal at your midheaven was to say, I'm going to selflessly serve in the name of this message about death in a way where everyone gets, not just Mary Helen this happens to. That's one of the big takeaways I got from, and I want to echo this, that you don't have to have a near-death experience to realize if you really study them. And there's a lot out there of really good material. And I'm going to do a shout out to Anthony Chain, who I met you through CHENE. What a great series. CHENE, all of near death. That's how I met Mary Helen.
Amazing.
And the message that he continues, which is in your chart with Aquarius in the midheaven, is selflessly, we realize no one is really special. I mean, we are, but we're not. The truth is, we all can ask ourselves, am I reframing, just like you explained the dentist, am I responsible to take the position that I want to be here? I choose this life. I have this funny song, falling in love with your fate, falling in love with your fate, falling in love with your fate. That's the job of everyone listening to this. I've been singing that song for years because I had some tragedy in my life. But when I took that song and realized it was a choice and I could fall in love with what God handed me was an assignment, the thing, the life, the drama, the trauma, even the pain becomes soothed. So I'm hoping.
Let me tell you this, because right on the heels of what you're saying. So when my father died, he had left in his will that he wanted to, if one of his children were to speak, and I mean, I knew it was going to be me because that's what I do, and it doesn't matter. Hear this, guys. This is so important because when you're talking about doing something selflessly or you're doing it for the benefit of the people around you, there's always going to be someone. So you can imagine my grief-stricken family. I get up there, I do this talk. We're in a church and there's 1,000 people who erupt into applause at the end of my eulogy because they found themselves where it ends with "let yourselves off the hook." This man they revered who looked and turned to my mother at that crucial moment and said, "Helen, I've had it wrong all along. Everybody's welcome here."
Everybody's
So
welcome here.
the whole place erupts, and you could see this collective sigh of, "Oh my gosh, I'm actually okay." But there were members of my family who took that and looked and went, "It's the Mary Helen show." And you have to know that no matter who, what, or where, when you present your truth, I don't care if it's family, if it's friends, if it's your work colleagues, there's always going to be someone who you're going to rub the wrong way. Get over it. Just get over it, get on with it, and stop looking for them to release you from that bondage, because it's never going to happen.
That was a direct message for me because I have
Yes,
elicited
it
in this.
was.
Yes, thank you. I really heard that. It makes me want to cry. And the last thing I want to say is that line from your father, "Everyone's welcome here," at the end of the last podcast. To think that there's nothing that the angels, that the council, that your guardians are not going to receive with compassion changes your inner dialogue, that for God's sake, you've done nothing wrong. This place is so hard. I find the human existence, no instruction manual, handed to people that you're supposed to fall in love with when maybe you don't even like them, not clear on what you're supposed to be when you grow up. They don't give you any direction. If you don't have an astrologer, you're like, something's wrong with me. All of that is included in the operating system until you watch these podcasts, you find out about near death, you study astrology, and in the pursuit of growing and learning and listening with an open heart, it's crazy what happens. Then you fall in love with life. You've helped me, Mary. I want you to know this. You've helped me fall in love with life.
Oh, thank you. And you've helped me fall in love with astrology.
So we're a team. I've got tears. May we all fall in love. May we change the narrative that something's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong. That if you think the heavens and the doors aren't going to open because of some religious construct that was put into place, it's not true. As the Hawaiians say, it's just changing an address. You're going to be somewhere else. And the more you study, and this is my passion this lifetime, the more you study, which simply means the innocence of saying, I don't know. I'm so interested. I'm so curious, Mary Helen. How did this? Keep asking the hard questions. Is there any last words? I love that your 95-year-old mother is there. Is there any last words that
We're
you want?
just having so much fun. Well, talk about a pure example of joie de vivre. And I look at people who are looking at me and my travels, and they're following us on Instagram and Facebook. And, I'm out here trying to save the world, and I'm doing all this stuff. Mom gets 50,000 views while people watch her eating a Snickers bar on a train in Italy. Do you know that's life, guys? She got 100,000 views in 2 days when people saw her standing in front of the statue of David in Florence. And then yet I'm spending my time at this grind, and I'm trying to save people from themselves. And that's this fickle life. I think that's hilarious. If you take any of that personally, you're going to just set yourself up for more hardship. And so I think it's really fun to be able to sit back and look. Mom tells a story about meeting somebody in my office, and my secretary goes, Mama Helen never drank, and she never smoked or swore or anything. And that's her secret to 95. And Mom turns to the old guy next to her and she goes, and what's yours? And he said, whiskey. And that to me says it all. There is no magic recipe. If you're not doing you, boo, then you are off track. That's the sin. That's where you've missed the mark. If you are doing you despite everything around you, despite what anybody else tries to shove down your throat, say about you, make you feel bad about whatever, then you're on track. That's as simple as that. The more people who are irritable and irritated in your world means you're doing really, really well.
I love your mom's giggle. That's making me so happy. Thank you so much. I feel like we should continue this, but we've just done an hour, and I want all of you to know that if you're interested in evolving, it's as simple as opening up the mind, studying and asking questions. That's the ultimate. It is really true that we come down here in the name of evolution. I just went to this unbelievable science museum, and I went into the planetarium and I saw all the other planets. I was like, whoa, Nelly, it was like that nitrous oxide experience. I had like, this is crazy. And there's only one planet in this whole galaxy that has little creatures that have hats and computers and podcasts and mothers who are 95 that tell their secrets. What? We are so privileged. This is so unusual that we found you today. So if you're watching this, you're one of those beings who are on the right street, and don't let your mind tell you different.
And remember, you already are that which you seek.
Thank you so much, Mary. Mary Helen, and thank you to your mom, and thank you. I'll never
She's
stop.
just been over there giggling.
I love that.
Thank you so much for listening. We want to keep this conversation going with you, so please subscribe to our podcast and leave a rating and review to make sure you never miss an episode. Remember, climate activist by day, human by night. Send Debra a DM on Instagram at Debra Silverman Astrology and visit DebraSilvermanAstrology.com. And we're going to leave you like we leave every single episode. Make it your mission to change the world.